welcome you today Michael Donkor, who has his debut novel out, which is very exciting and looks very beautiful. And he's going to be interviewed by Yemisi Mokuolu, who is a local resident and general round expert in lots of things in life.
We've had a TV programmes that I've watched where someone's done an in-conversation in the Waterstones in a bookshop. I'm like, I've arrived. But this is actually special for me because so my name's Yemisi and I'm a local resident living in Epsom. I don't know where, but somewhere in Epsom. I scuttle between my house and the train station and scuttle back. But I've started my career basically working towards raising, promoting the profile of African art and artists. And my journey started in 2002, straight out of university, and I was met with a real shock at how little people knew about African arts and culture. And so, not with any plan, but through kind of just general drive and motivation, I just set on this task to raise the profile and did that through a series of club nights and festivals and training programs for artists, crossing from filmmakers to writers to musicians, and I've been able to carve a career up until now, fortunately supporting their endeavours and operate across Africa and Europe, working to push much more greater understanding and more in-depth opportunities for a whole continent of experiences and expressions. So this is wonderful. Every time we birth a new writer or to tell Africa stories, I'm like just really happy. So thank you for having me here to have this in-conversation with Michael. But what we wanted to do, first of all, just to kind of like settle us in, is I'd really love to invite you to just read an extract, please, from your debut novel, and then I'll ask you some questions, and I'd really love to invite everybody to ask some questions as well. And just to kind of like set the context a little bit, you know, in a very generalistic way, the book for me, it's beautifully written. It resonates with me anyway personally, but I think it resonates with just human confusion and the disconnect between generations, the disconnect between geography as well, with first generation and second generation, the perspectives that we have when we move to a different space. We carry all these tropes and stereotypes, and you know, the place back home changes, but it doesn't change for us when we move to a different arena. And this, on the surface level, this book, I think, brings that forward. And I don't want to spoil the book. There is so much depth to it that I think you'll enjoy experiencing personalities and ideas that aren't in the mainstream, and that's what I think is really, really brave and wonderful about this. But if you'd like to introduce just a setup to the section that we've decided to kind of like present.
Brilliant. And thank you for that lovely introduction, those lovely words about the novel. So, very briefly, this novel is Belinda's story. So Belinda is a house girl in a middle-class household on the outskirts of Kumasi. And Belinda is marvellous at her job. She's very diligent and very kind of well-mannered and sensible. And she's very well respected by Auntie and Uncle who own the house that she cleans in. And Auntie and Uncle have some friends come over from London who, like Auntie and Uncle, are kind of retired Ghanaians. And they meet Belinda and they think, goodness, isn't she fantastic? And they're particularly interested in how fantastic Belinda is because back in London, they've got a very kind of rebellious, troubled daughter called Amma. And Nana and Doctor, these friends from London, think, oh gosh, if we can bring Belinda back to London to meet Amma, then perhaps Amma will be lifted out of her moment of madness, whatever's going on with her, and she'll return to her better, more ladylike ways. So the bit that I'm going to read for you is just after Belinda has arrived in London. So this is her first experience of being out of Ghana. She's in the UK, she's in Nana and Doctor's house for the first time, and she's kind of acclimatising to this bizarre new world that she's found herself in. A strange white flower bloomed on the ceiling of the front room in which she waited. Beneath her feet, wooden floors, wide strips scarred with pale patches. To her left, through a folded back partition, was the dining room, a dark, bloody cave with a long table set as though guests were expected soon. Belinda had had such grand visions of her new home. She was unsurprised that reality matched none of them. Auntie and Uncle's house was so much wider. In Durban, the houses of all those other bogas, consultants, accountants, lawyers returned from overseas, had been much larger, with rooms coming out from everywhere, rooms that had no purpose, bathrooms for guests, for no one, annexes and servants' quarters to the back and sides. Didn't Nana and Dr. Ottawa feel boxed in or too small here? And why did the cars pass right in front of the house, where there was no perimeter wall? Where was the swimming pool? Unlike Belinda, whose fingers now pinched each other until she pushed her hands away, Mother had been calm when the biggest change came. On the last day of the Easter vacation, Mother should have returned from the comm centre in the middle of Aduruba with a yellow Western Union receipt to put with the others in the battered tin. She didn't. Her return to their room that afternoon was ghostly. Belinda was distracted from the jollof on the stove by the tinkle of keys. Mother waited in the doorway for a moment, very still, very stiff. Mother's sweep of hair, turning brownish from sitting in the sun, perhaps seemed more wild than usual. Mother dropped onto the bed and kept her stare on the blistered wall. "It concerns you also," Mother had said evenly. Belinda turned the temperature down and flipped the dishcloth over her shoulder. The paper in Mother's weak grasp was blue, and the first example of her father's handwriting Belinda had seen for years. Her first real evidence of his existence. On his aerogram, his words came in writing more girlish than her own. The careful characters made the letter's news bite even harder. Though short, it needed to be read again and again, the noise of the Akuya Pim children next door playing their stupid clapping game, always as loud as though in the room with them. Mother had sighed and sighed and sighed, and then rose to scrape the bottom of the pan, Belinda assumed, to check that it had caught slightly for added smokiness. The note ended without even an attempt at apology for no longer being able to pay the school fees. Mother turned the dial down lower so that the flame sputtered. Her eyebrows were raised and her whole face tightened when she had turned around to conclude, "Well, that's that then. We found something else for you to do." Now, under the huge white rose, Belinda snapped her knees together to stop herself from thinking. She picked up the remote control, then put it down. Nana was taking far too long in the bathroom. Belinda's attention fell on a sticky brown ring on the coffee table. The sun seemed to show a grey film on all of the surfaces. "Nana? Ama!" Belinda approached the mantelpiece, extended a finger and dragged it along a shelf, drawing a deep and perfectly straight line. A ball of fuzz gathered. Certainly it would be an intrusion and a rudeness, but returning to the sofa? That would be a laziness. Walking out, she found herself in a corridor, the end of which was lit up from below. The steps moaned at her heels and took her into an airy kitchen, everything here a hospital white, impossible to achieve in dusty Kumasi. So much white. Cups, plates, floor. One unplastered, crumbling wall shouted difference. But perhaps not like a hospital at all, instead more like a factory. The polished metal of the cupboards, the cooker, the upside-down chimney above the hob, the fridge, the bins, the clock on that messier wall reminded her of cruel machines. The kitchen lacked wood, pottery, anything homely. Beneath the sink, sprays that smelled safe and familiar were arranged. The man on Mr. Muscle was good. Belinda lunged for it. Back upstairs, she wanted to clap as the foam's bubbles cracked over the splodges on the table and the coiling in the small of her back stopped. She heard a muffled shouting from somewhere and then the slamming of a door. Belinda shoved away the cloth and can. Telltale Mr. Muscle rolled out from beneath the table, grinning at her. "Oh, sorry, I'm only..." "No, it's me," said Nana. I caught her upstairs and we talked. Nana flopped onto the sofa. Belinda copied. "Okay. What will it take to have her sit? You see how she leapt off from the cab as if it please, as if no, thank you, nothing. Hello, they've all gone out of fashion." Nana froze, with tiny folds around her eyes stretched and her hands begging. "She apologizes to you and must have a lie down because of this late returning last night. What kind of introduction?" "I don't mind. She has been so very kind and helpful to me in the taxi on the way from the airport. So, it was this AS results yesterday. And so she has to celebrate with their friends or whatever. All A grades. That's what I hear her shouting when she ran from this house to leave me reading about her success from some small paper on the side. All A grades." Belinda liked Nana's soft chuckle. "I want to even sit her down to announce how joyful we are. And we give her great thanks. But will she come and talk, as we do now?" Nana pulled her red cardigan tighter over her shirt. "Maybe your first mission of the time here is to find out her last 24 hours for me, eh? I'm certain she has done nothing untoward, but I need to be informed of such things." "Mission sounds too big for a small one as me." "Sir, for me, mission is exact and right. Praise God, your auntie, she released you for this, even as she wanted to keep you and your fine work for herself. But that, my dear, is what loyalty truly means. You sacrifice for one another when it's like that. You get me? You have to." Aye. Nana shifted the tiny tail of her lizard brooch so it sat more proudly on the swell of her left breast. "Always sticking together. From day one, our confirmation ceremony, Nana's earrings danced. We were something so beautiful, special. I'm sure of it." Belinda chewed the inside of her cheek. Nana moved the lizard's tail back again. And you can be Amma's good friend too, eh? Show her your goodness. Tear her out from whatever making her behaving in these ways. Tantrum, silence, crying. Belinda stared at her palms as if checking the lines there would somehow reveal something. She sat on her hands. Goodness. So good that her mother, creator of such goodness, sent her away without doubt or hesitation. So good that her father didn't wait around to see what the goodness he bred looked like. Had she ever seen goodness back home when she was growing up? For her and for mother, the village had offered little in the way of anything like that. The village was a place of turned backs and rolled eyes, suspicion, spit, goodness. Belinda knew she'd always have to struggle hard to get anywhere near it. But she would never let Nana know that. Nana did not want to know about that. Belinda forced her weight down onto her hands even more firmly. "Ajay, I'm doing it, aren't I? Don't overwhelm." They put it like that, your auntie, my husband, both of them. Overwhelm was their term. And I was all like, "No, I'll be playing it cool. This is not cool, is it? I must be making you hot, eh?" A rolling Mr. Muscle encouraged her near her feet, but everything was too much and too fast for Belinda to work out how to respond. "Listen to me, I'm so jumbled up and excited." Nana tapped her knuckles against her forehead and raised perfect eyebrows. I meant to start with it. My great plan. Sorry, eh? Bad nana. Call me that one. Wrap my wrist. There's this excellent occasion to introduce you to our community here, to present you nicely in some weeks. Amma, she complains I shouldn't demand so much of her time, but perhaps you might ask her to, or tell her you would like to observe the Ghana 4. Ghana 4 is our... Belinda was grateful for the doors click, the rush of cars and wind, the footsteps bringing in Dr. Otuo. He muttered about being stuck up a tube, said underground was terrible. Belinda breathed and her chest felt like it might expand endlessly. My sucker and splendor. Dr. Otuo bowed to his wife and she replied with a curtsy, our new daughter, Akwaba. You are more than welcome. He seemed thinner than he had during their visit to the band, more tired. He slapped Belinda's back, and the weight of his man's hands was a whip to her. She shot up, took his briefcase and the jacket slung over his arm. Madame, we have prepared for him. I have leftover okra and fish. We cannot let him be hungry, madame, eh? Belinda zipped off, put the doctor's things on hooks and clattered into the kitchen. The busy washing machine tickled the whole room. Belinda! Nana yelled. Belinda bobbed beneath the swinging saucepans, flipped open the fridge and dismissed tins with lids curled back, wilting green and brown sauces in Tupperware. Then, yes, a glossy orange stew. Without even tasting it, she knew it would need Maggie and the rest. Belinda! Doctor and Nana's approaching footsteps stirred a feeling within. She searched for cayenne, nutmeg, a little ginger, pinch, pinch, pinch from each. The feeling flung itself between her kidneys, liver, unable to escape through the belly button, and even though its head butted and tried to pierce. Doctor shook his head. Calm, child. Calm yourself down. She scraped the pan, careful to get the delicious bits from the bottom, scooped a man-sized portion onto a plate, and brought the rice closer. Not enough pilchards in this stew, not enough at all. Slam, bang, the dish thrust into the microwave. Her fingers skipped over the numbers and the bowl spun. And now Mary would have done the same, spinning in circles until she collapsed, giggling. Belinda, you are quite the dervish, lady. I was expecting to come down to a pigsty, the amount of noise. You are a hard-working son. That is one that Uncle told me of you back home. He had me learn it, that I am never to see in your house because there will always be a big money crisis for you to repair. Or you are with some book until late in the study reading even more of these tax laws. He tells me, on top of this, I am to treat you as well as I treated him. And I will honor, for this is the greatest kindness you have shown me in having me here. Isn't that right? The feeling bounced high and bounced on and landed on its back, its legs tickling Belinda's diaphragm, as Dr. Otuo hummed and slid a cell phone and then a booklet across the table in her direction. The booklet's cover showed a young woman with unusually large glasses. The glasses had no frames. The woman focused on a cylinder, a metal candle. Upside down, Belinda read Abacus Educational Centre. Beside that, in similar but smaller letters, committed to your boldest future. We want you here for learning, Belinda. No cooking, cleaning, ironing, cooking. You must learn, eh? Oh, good.
No, thank you for that. I really enjoyed that part because for me, it kind of like, it reveals the perspectives of like, you know, Belinda who's coming from rural Ghana into city Ghana and then into London and her perspectives, and we get these little hints, these flavours of her perspective, and it kind of brings us into perspective about our own lives and, you know, and our assumptions about what someone like Belinda how she would see our lives. It's quite a nice way of looking at ourselves through someone else's eyes, and I really enjoy actually. And because it's so rare to get these types of characters in literature, I really enjoy obviously Nana, the mother figure, and the relationship with her daughter Amma, which embarrassingly I could relate to, and now I'm like, oh my god, I shouldn't have been so tough on my mom. So I'm not going to tell her that though.
Would not be wise thing to do.
Should
No,
I
don't
do
do
that?
that. Don't do that.
But I've got a load of questions to ask you, and I don't know which one to start with, but I'm just going to read them straight off. So we'll go in with the obvious ones, which is because it's African thematic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll start off hard, straight in there. So do you feel that there is a thirst for African storytelling and authentic African perspectives in contemporary literature? Or what has been your experience of people's response or reaction to authentic storytelling about Africa's stories?
I think we are living at a time when there is a desire for diversity across artistic forms. And I think some people have an anxiety about that. Some people kind of think it's a kind of fad or a kind of trend. But actually, I think it comes from a real desire to know more of the world. And I think there's an increasing understanding that there have been voices in bits of the world that haven't been listened to for a very long time. And so people are responding to the novel with quite a lot of excitement and curiosity, actually, about the portrayal of middle-class Africa. So you get in the novel this life being presented to you, which is retired Ghanaians that you don't often encounter very often in contemporary literature. And equally, you get middle-class Ghanaians in London, middle-class Ghanaians who are able to send their daughter to an independent school. And those bits of African society are very rarely explored, but they are very influential and very important for African communities in and around. So I think people are enjoying the kind of element of surprise. Aha, I didn't realise that this was going on. And they're enjoying kind of learning about something new. That seems to be the general kind of sense of getting from early readers.
Okay. And also I think it's quite nice, like as I said before, whether I like it or not, Amma's stories, like, there's so many parallels, public school, West Africa, first generation. So it's a gift actually to be able to explore some characterization that always seem to be removed from, and it's a gift to be now part of mainstream conversations. Kind of thing. And what responses maybe have you had from people of African heritage?
I think recognition that images of Africa in sort of recent times have focused a lot on the issues surrounding that continent and the issues with poverty and lack of education and the problems of kind of women's rights in Africa, but that this is a novel that addresses some of those problems, but that also tries to think about the joyfulness of Ghanaian life. It's a novel that I hope is quite funny, and that focuses on some of the kind of absurd bits of Ghanaian culture and Ghanaian behaviour, because Ghanaians do ridiculous things and have ridiculous ideas about what their children should do and how girls should behave and how boys should behave. And one of the things I was trying to do is not write a miserabilist reflection on Africa. Oh, isn't this an awful place to live? Oh, aren't I lucky that I don't live there? Or whatever. And to instead kind of think, well, actually, there's so much humour and energy and excitement and resilience and all these wonderful things. And those, I hope, have found a kind of home in the novel.
It's incredibly relatable. It really is. And I think regardless of where people are geographically, or even their cultural backgrounds, it's very humanist and very relatable.
Yeah.
To kind of like, just a little bit about what you were saying in terms of mainstreaming, popularizing African experiences. We've got people like Beyonce and, working with writers and artists, and it'd be great to kind of like get your responses to the responsibility or what you're observing right now in terms of artists articulating their African voice. I mean, it's not much of a question, but it's more sort of like, have you got like an observation of what's, you know, what's going on?
I think it's a real challenge, isn't it, to be kind of expected to be responsible as a writer, because first and foremost my responsibility is to my characters, is to making their worlds feel as kind of convincing and fully fleshed as I possibly can. So that's my primary responsibility. However, it would be foolish of me to not think about the fact that, for example, you know, this year, there aren't that many novels published by young black British authors. There just aren't that many. And so I have to think about responsibility. I have to think about the fact that I'm being given a platform on which to sort of say important things, I suppose. So whilst I don't want to become burdened by this idea of presenting an African voice, there aren't that many African voices out there, so I kind of have to use the platform that I've got very carefully. So it's a very kind of vexed position, really.
What inspired you to write this?
Oh golly. A number of different things. I think sort of the desire to write in the round comes from my kind of desire to control. So I don't know, I think when I'm sitting at my desk and writing something, I'm in charge. You know, I can move these characters around and put them in weird situations and make them do things that they don't want to do, and I'm controlling this environment in a way that obviously I cannot control my own life. So that sort of ability to, you know, be an architect in that way really appeals to me, I think. I think more specifically about this novel, the inspiration kind of came from partly Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is the kind of, I don't know, kind of permission giver, I think, for lots of us young British African writers. I read Purple Hibiscus when I was about 20, I think, and I just thought, I've never read anything like this at all. I've never encountered a writer presenting African life in this language and thinking about the psychology of African characters with such complexity and sensitivity. I just hadn't encountered it before. And
just so unapologetic.
And so unapologetic.
Just sort of like, forget about everything. Everything's in there. We know the context, but we're here now. It's the 21st century.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a huge and important writer for me. And I always knew that I wanted to write, and sort of her having her stories out there in the world kind of made me think, okay, this is something that's realistic. What stories do I have to tell? And I was always struck by the house girls that I encountered when I went to Ghana on summer holidays when I was younger. So the sort of general pattern was between the ages of like 8 to about 12, I suppose. School would end on July the 23rd, and then we'd be put on a plane on July the 24th, and we'd be in Ghana for 6 weeks, and then September would come and I'd go straight back to school. So quite disorientating. In those 6 weeks in Ghana, we would be in the kind of fairly well-to-do homes of our relatives and friends and family, and all of those people had staff. And amongst those staff were kids who were the same age as me. So there was this very odd experience of me as a 9 or 10-year-old waking up in the morning and having a 9 or 10-year-old, usually girl, bring me my breakfast, but being told very explicitly that this girl was not a friend and she was here to do a job, and that she was going to be silent and she kind of moved in this ghostly way around the house, and there was no reason for me to interact with her at all. And I sort of stuck by that rule and, you know, didn't really cross the boundary. But the various house girls that I encountered stayed with me, and I thought, well, what on earth were they thinking about these people that they were working for? What on earth did they make of this bizarre situation that they'd been placed in, which was at once a situation of great privilege, or you're not in the village anymore, you've come to the big city, well done, but also you're estranged from your family. There's no clear sense about what your future might be. What's going on in these young girls' heads? And that's where it came from, really, kind of thinking about those thought processes.
Wonderful. I mean, you know, Belinda's not the only female character. I mean, all the characters, all the central characters are female, and, you know, while I was reading it, it was very you know, I'm trying to craft this question that's kind of like, you know, as a man, you know, what's your journey in terms of writing about women from the first person? What was your process? Kind of like craft the question for me, because you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes,
you
yeah.
know?
It's really interesting. It's a question that a few people have asked me as I've been talking about Spoke in the last few months, this sort of challenge, I suppose, of taking on a female perspective, given that I'm a man. But when I was writing the novel, I never thought about it at all. I never woke up and kind of sat at my desk and thought, okay, right now I've got to get into the mindset of a woman, and off I go and think about womanly things. I just didn't really think about it at all. And maybe part of that comes from an extreme sense of arrogance. Part of that, kind of not being too concerned, I think comes from the fact that I grew up surrounded by very vociferous, very powerful women who were very keen to tell me about their experiences. And so I had a kind of enormous wealth of material to draw on. And I'm really pleased that I didn't kind of think about writing it from a female perspective, kind of being overly concerned with that, because I think it would have been a bit contrived. And there would have been all of these kind of shoehorned in references to like girl stuff and women's things. And actually that's sort of not there, really. It feels much more natural and organic. And of course there are conversations between the female characters about issues that I think are important to women, but they happen organically rather than, wow, 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 this is the girl bit. So yeah, that's my response to that question.
I understand what you mean, because it made me think actually about the fact that a lot of intimate conversations that are placed in the women's sphere are actually not gender specific.
Yeah.
So it was, I just wanted to pose the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because it would be interesting. I couldn't not.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
So we'll take it into more relaxed gear.
Go wherever you like, wherever.
And just be more sort of like talking us through your journey from, you know, concept to actually publishing. It would be really interesting actually to hear about that.
Sure. It was a very wiggly journey. That's how I'll preface all of this. So I started writing the novel in one way or another about 10 years ago. And I was writing it alongside teaching, so obviously, you know, teaching is a very demanding job. So it took me quite a long time to write. I spent 1 year teaching part-time to allow myself a bit more time to write. I did a master's in creative writing for a year, and that gave me even more time. So I sort of carved out, you know, some space within that decade to kind of really focus on writing a bit more seriously. But it took about 10 years in total. And after the 10 years, I had to find an agent. And I did that fairly blithely, so I just got myself a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which is this huge directory of every agent in the country, with a little kind of note about what each agent is after. And I sent out my novel with my lovely little cover letter to about, you know, more than 200 agencies. And no, this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. And no one responded. Or actually, when people did respond, they sent like a standard form letter, which showed me very clearly that they hadn't read the book at all. And I'd done work experience previously at literary agencies, so I kind of knew what happens to unsolicited manuscripts that don't really see the light of day. So it felt like quite a kind of thankless process. And then, when I was feeling a bit sort of doom-laden about the whole thing, I spied this competition, which was for youngish writers. And the prize was a year of mentoring from someone significant in the publishing industry. So I kind of thought, well, I've got this manuscript, there's no harm in me kind of sending this off to this competition, let's just see what happens. And I won a place on this mentoring scheme, which was brilliant. And one of the prizes alongside the mentoring was that you got to have a lunch with various industry bigwigs. And there was an agent at this lunch, and I'd heard lots of things about her. Her name was Juliet Pickering, and she's got this quite formidable reputation. And I also knew that she was really keen in expanding her list of authors. Not all agents want to do that, some of them are very happy with their set list, but Juliet was very keen to find new voices. And so during this lunch, I just sat myself next to her and just like talked at her like this and didn't let anyone else talk to her. There was a lot of kind of, no, we're just in the middle of things. And my gabbling away at her worked, and she said she wanted to see a bit of the novel, and I sent her a bit. And then we worked together for about 6 months through various edits. And that was quite a sort of difficult process because it had been my baby for such a long time, and she had some quite radical suggestions, so there was a bit of to and fro and tussling over that. And then at the end of those 6 months, Juliet said, okay, I think it's ready now. And I was like, ready for what? What do you mean? This thing has been mine for 10 years, what do you mean ready? And she asked me if there were any particular publishers that I wanted it to be sent to, and then she had been talking to various publishers for the last 6 months about me and the book, and had been talking me and the book up. So she sent it to those publishers, she sent it to the publishers that I was interested in. And then there was this horrendous kind of 2 or 3 week period of waiting to hear back from the various publishing houses. And every day there was just no. And Juliet, my agent, did this very kind of kind diplomatic thing of just sending me the nice bits of all the rejection emails, which I thank her for to this very day. And then we got down to just 2 publishers, and I kind of thought, oh, well, that's it. No, nothing's going to come of this. And then those 2 publishers said that they were both interested. And so in the space of about a day and a half, the tables turned entirely, and it went from this process of me kind of knocking on all of these doors to these 2 publishers wanting me and wanting my book. And I sort of didn't really know how to deal with that sort of role reversal. But I then spent the next week or so moving between the 2 publishers, with them kind of beaming at me and saying, we can do this for you and this for you and this for you. And then eventually I chose one of the publishers, and that was a year ago, and we've been working on the novel since then, and here it is in glorious Technicolor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Wonderful. No, thank you.
So that was the journey. I told you wiggly.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important for people to understand the bravery and the dedication it takes. You know, we read these books, we enjoy them, but it really matters. So thank you for that. Before I throw it to the floor, just one last question, and kind of like, it would be really nice to know kind of like, what are your literary influences?
Oh, golly.
You know, besides Chimamanda, but you know,
They are...
something to read. Maybe what you're reading now.
What am I reading now? Actually, I can see it over there. So I just started reading Crudo by Olivia Lang, which is, by the sounds of things, a very experimental novel about the summer of 2017. And Olivia Lang wrote it very quickly to kind of capture a sense of the now. And it's a novel that moves between the first and the third person, and it moves between kind of perspectives. And yes, that's what I'm reading at the moment. In terms of influences more widely, Toni Morrison is hugely significant for me. I hope one day to be able to come anywhere near doing what she's able to do with sentences. I think she's extraordinary. Virginia Woolf is also another kind of literary goddess of mine, and I think the way that she presents characters in all their messiness and gives you a really rounded sense of the way that we think is something that I will strive to do in my writing throughout my career. Who else? Poetry also is quite a big touchstone for me, so I love Sharon Olds. I absolutely love Sharon Olds' poetry. She's a very autobiographical poet. She writes a lot about the experiences of motherhood. She writes about her own body and the way that her body changes in a very kind of breathtakingly honest way. She's very frank about the tensions of family life, and she's very kind of open about the kind of hatred sometimes she feels towards her children. And I really admire that bravery. And actually sort of looping back to a question you were asking before about writing female characters, part of my ease with that situation, I think, is because lots of my literary influences are women writers that write brilliantly about female experience, so it didn't feel like especially uncharted territory for me.
Good tutors.
It's in my head the whole time.
Good tutors, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. So, do we have any questions from anyone? Oh, good. Okay, so we'll go from the
I'm interested in, when you were writing it, did you think of an audience who you might be writing for?
Nope. Never at all. I think I was aware towards the end of the writing process that it would be kind of described in this very loose way as literary fiction. And I suppose I've got a sense of what that, or what the readers of literary fiction might be like, but I was never writing to them. Because, again, I suppose a bit like my response to the question about writing about female experiences, I think if I'd had an awareness of the audience, it would have felt very constrained and would have just felt like quite an awkward thing to read. It would have felt like there were things being signposted the whole time, little kind of tidbits that were just for my literary fiction audience and for no one else. So I tried to write a novel that I would enjoy reading.
I think it goes back to when you were saying about you try not to be bogged down by the responsibility, but however, you honour the realities, like the context in which you're writing.
Absolutely.
So yes, I can definitely, from reading anyway, it feels very accessible. It feels very wide range of audiences.
Just adding on to it then, so if you had a response from a Ghanaian mother, as opposed to a white middle-class Surrey housewife, where would your literary sort of heart be most hurt, or respond most to what would come out of them?
And this is not dodging the question at all, but I think I'd be equally interested in both responses, because on the one hand, the Ghanaian mother is going to have, I'd assume, I'd hope, a really personal connection with some of the ideas being presented and some of the kind of scenes that are painted in the novel, and she may well also have points of criticism. It's not like this, it's actually meant to be like this, or you haven't spelled this thing right, actually this is what I do with my king or whatever it might be. And equally, I'd be really interested to hear what our Surrey housewife thinks about it, because this is a world that I'm assuming she doesn't know very well. I'm really interested to see what she's gleaned from this novel, what kind of points of connection she's found between her own life and the world of this novel, and what things were new to her, that kind of thing. So I'm really open to all reader responses. I don't know, I'm very much of the view that I have done my work now, and now it's for readers to kind of make what they will of this thing. I've been asked a few times, what do I want readers to take from this novel, what message? Take what message you want to take from it. There are various messages hidden away in this novel. Find whatever ones appeal to you.
It's true.
Yeah, it's for you to do the work now. I've done my decade of life.
It's very rich and very nourishing, so it's a good read. We'll get to you in a minute.
Firstly, I just want to say it looks absolutely stunning. The use of the colours are just beautiful with that individual. I want to just pick it up and start reading it. My question is about you saying that you wanted to get the message out about these house girls. Did you do any research, or is this all from your head?
It's all from my head, really. It's all from things I've seen, from conversations I've had with my mum, from imagining.
Yeah.
Really, it's. I suppose I could have done some quite intensive research into this, but I was so interested in Belinda's emotional world, and that felt like something that I could imagine and kind of access as a human, rather than needing to go and full SOAS library or whatever. So yeah, it wasn't researched in that way. It sort of came from me.
When you were going to Ghana as a child, did you ever talk? You said you could never be friends with these girls. Did you ever actually talk to them? As something stuck in your head from not talk?
So
I know you spoke, but as in a deep, in-depth conversation? Did you ever talk, and then maybe that stuck in your head to then form?
Not really, actually, because there was always a kind of a language issue as well, because I don't speak Twi very well at all. My Twi is absolutely terrible. The Twi that I know is the little bit of Twi that's in this novel, and I've made use of it. God damn it. But I don't speak conversational Twi at all, which is a real shame. So there was always that language barrier as well. And the house girls, English was never kind of fantastic. But I do remember very clearly one house girl who was called Belinda, but it's not like Belinda in this novel. So real life Belinda was about 11, and I think I was in Ghana when I met her when I was 11. And she was just the naughtiest person I had ever encountered in my life. And I was quite a kind of prim and prissy 11-year-old, so I kind of liked doing things the right way, and things were neat, and I followed the rules, etc. And so when I encountered this house girl that was kind of a bit slow with her work and a bit slovenly and would be a bit cheeky, and she'd kind of chase the other boys around the compound, I was kind of struck by her. And so she is kind of Mary, essentially, in the novel. So there's another house girl who is the opposite of Belinda in this novel, and Mary is boisterous and breaks rules and is cheeky and is kind of wise in a surprising way. And that character is based very much on this Belinda character that I met when I was 11.
I just realised I've been doing really, really bad timekeeping.
7:24.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
I'm going to have a question from you.
Yeah,
please.
just
We'll
have
to keep
one
this
question.
special.
Okay. Sorry.
I think there's a real conversation to be had around domestic helps
Yeah.
on the continent particularly, and I just wondered whether your publisher has will be selling the rights to a Ghanaian publisher or an African publisher, because there is definitely conversation to be had around how vulnerable sometimes the domestic help can be and how potentially exploited. I mean, they're obviously two sides of the coin, they access to education, literature, to education. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, or how important it is for you to get the work out back to the continent.
I'm really interested to see what Ghanaians in Ghana make of it, because it's a novel that simultaneously celebrates and critiques Ghanaian culture and some quite deep-seated values that Ghanaians hold quite dear, things to do with domestic stuff, and also to do with sexuality and gender and identity in broad senses. So I think I do want Ghanaians to read it. I think some of them will find it quite an uncomfortable read, but I am happy for them to be uncomfortable, and I want to have the conversations that are generated by that discomfort, and I want to kind of talk about some of the difficult things that Ghanaians assume are just kind of fine and you can kind of get over, but that actually have real, quite damaging impacts on young Ghanaian people, and that's homophobia and the way that young girls are treated as domestic servants. So, yeah, there are things.
Is there an African publisher already that has got the rights?
Publishing in Africa is a really complicated process.
The same kind of, but there will be different means to. So there's loads of literature festivals.
Exactly.
And the Akai Book Festival, and so there's
The
means
Akai
to,
Book Festival in Lagos, right?
I'm actually going to Ghana in Saturday, so maybe I'll do a little book reading. I'll get to a little fishing village, that'd be great. But the funny thing that I was just thinking is, interestingly enough, Nollywood tackles a lot of the house girl situations very head on, and really brings to light the difficulties, the injustices, and so these conversations are had. They are really being had. And so I think the place for your book, or the reception, probably will be much softer than assumed. But yeah, I'll have a read in Busua and I'll let you know. One more question. Yes?
I'm going to go. We're going to get two little ones. First of all, because it's called House Girl in America, isn't it? And it's called Hold in the UK. So I was talking about that.
Oh, where did you start?
I've always imagined that. Well, actually, no, that's not true. It was originally called The Bandages, and then I got further and further into the writing process, and actually Hold kept coming back to me as an idea that resonated a bit more powerfully for all sorts of reasons. I think predominantly because of the combined idea in the word Hold of intimacy and restriction, so kind of being close to someone in a lovely way, but also being bound by something. And that sort of interplay is kind of dealt with throughout the novel, I think. So Hold, I really like, it works for me, that's what I wanted to call the book. When the book was sold in America, they were kind of delighted with the book, and they weren't going to make any changes, and I didn't need to do any editing, and all that was wonderful, but they weren't sure about the title. And I said, oh, but it's called Hold. And they said, well, actually, American readers need something that's more head-on, more direct. So I said, okay. So I was presented with a variety of options that were more head-on and direct, including The Three Girls. Which
These are our cousins. We have to be more embracing of the cultural nuances.
But we sort of compromised on House Girl as a kind of term that kind of was more kind of immediate, but there was some kind of ambiguity around it as well. So that was the sort of conversation that went on around the title. So the idea is the British readership is happier to deal with a title that's a bit more ambiguous, and American readers want to know what's going on from the get-go. That's what I was told.
We have to be, I think House Girl will work fine in across Africa, much more than Hold. So, our final question, AB, was it?
So you've got a glossary at the front, haven't you? A tweet, and things that you sort of scattered in the novel. And I know you said you don't speak fluently, but do you think it's important to sort of, for the character, does it create the characters in those words in the right places?
That's a good question. I think one of the main reasons why I wanted there to be some tweet in a novel was to reflect the way that certainly my parents switched between English and Twi in this quite anarchic, quite bizarre way. It's just how Ghanaians speak. There'll be like a bit of Twi at the beginning of the sentence, and then it will be completed in English. And there's no rules for when that happens. Sometimes it is because there isn't a word in Twi or in English, so they kind of have to be resourceful in that way. But sometimes it's just, oh, I've got bored of talking in Twi now, I'm going to talk in English. And so I needed to have some movement between the two languages if I was going to try and authentically replicate the way that Ghanaians really speak to one another.
And I think that's another one of the gifts within it as well, because some of the sentiments, especially with, oh my goodness, the Mary, they just taste sweeter when she's, going through the Twi in English. It makes sense, and so it's definitely bilingual. Anyone bilingual will absolutely rejoice and enjoy that and relate to it. So we have come to the end, but I do have one more question. So what next for you and the book? Is there going to be like a TV series or a...
Possibly. There's the possibility of a TV programme, but I can't say too much about that at the moment.
I'm reading like it's so good at me. I know your I know your agent's mind. I could just be going through it going, right, TV.
So fingers crossed it may end up on the small screen here somewhere, which would be wonderful. And for me, lots of teaching and thinking about novel number 2, which will start happening properly, I think, in November of this year.
Super. So what, 2028?
Thanks for the vote of confidence there. Thanks for that.
Listen, Michael, it was a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a joy. It's been lovely. Thank you.
And I really welcome everybody to definitely get a copy of this. But let's show our appreciation to some.
Thank you very much, Michael, and also thank you to Yemisi for conducting this. You're happy to sign copies of your book?
time, yes.
And Carly's happy to take the money for it.